everyone. This is Jill Hurston with Excellarate. Welcome to our webinar today. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick sound check to make sure that our audience can see and hear us just fine. So if anybody from the audience could please type in to your questions box or chat box that you can see our panelists and that you can see the screen, hear me just fine, I'd greatly appreciate it. Even though one of our panelists just disappeared. He will be back. We do have three.
Maybe you can hear the other panelists laughing
here. This is not a disappearing act. There he is. He's back. Awesome. So if anybody from the audience, can you just verify that you can hear me and see our screen? Excellent. Thank you very much. So with it being at the top of the hour, we're going to go ahead and get started. So hi, this is Jill Hurston with Excellarate. Welcome to our webinar today. I want to remind everybody that this session is being recorded. So you will receive an email from me with a direct link to the recording tomorrow. And if you have any questions during this session, please type them into your chat box and we will get to them as appropriate, or we also have a Q&A at the end of this session. So with that, I'd like to introduce Rohit Sinha. He is with Excellarate and he is our moderator today. Rohit, over to you.
Okay, thanks Jill. And hello everyone, welcome to our webinar. The topic is how teams and leaders can unleash the power of Agile. And then in this webinar, I'll encourage you all to ask the questions via question box, and I will try to get all of the questions when you ask or at the end of the presentation. So now I would like to introduce you to our panelists, Ron Lickey and Tom Evans. So let me give their brief introduction. I'll start with Ron. So Ron Lickey has championed delighting customers for 30 plus years and believe that strong product/engineering collaboration is essential to achieving that goal. And as a consultant full-time since 2012, he's focused on making software development hum, taking fractional roles as interim VP engineering, untangling knots in the software development, building cohesive team that owns the product, mentoring and coaching managers at all levels. Now I'll introduce Tom. Tom Evans is a senior principal consultant and trainer at 280 Group, and he's an internationally recognized authority in product management, product marketing, international business, go-to-market strategies, business partnerships, and entrepreneurship. In his extensive experience, he has helped startups through Fortune 500 companies create and launch winning products and has led business development efforts in the US and the global markets. So with this, I hand it over to our panelists, Tom and Ron. Tom and Ron, over to you.
Okay, so Tom, do you want to add anything to what Rohit?
No, that was a good introduction. Thank you.
All right, good. So one of the things I do in my consulting practice is to train Agile teams, and one of the things that I have universally done over now I counted them up over 160 Agile trainings. I start by asking everyone in the class, "What's your experience with Agile?" And I get some interesting answers. I get answers like, "Well, I was at a company that was sort of Agile," or "We were Agile-ish," or "I was at a company that said they were Agile." That's always pretty telling when they put it that way. I was at a company that was Agile in name only. I got this one last year where someone said, "Well, we Frankenstein together an Agile process." And then this one's my favorite. The company sprinkled Agile buzzwords across the annual plan like magic fairy dust. So I've got a colleague who does due diligence for actually private equity companies, and he used to just ask companies that were prospective purchases of the private equity company. He used to ask, "Well, are you Agile?" And pretty soon everyone checked that box, and he found that he had to ask a series of follow-up questions to go more deeply to find out whether they were doing something more than just practices and whether they understood why they were doing those practices, what was behind those practices that they were doing. So being Agilish these days doesn't really cut it anymore. So a little bit more background on me. I was a programmer. There's an assembly language program I wrote by hand early on. After 7 years of programming, I went to Apple. I was recruited by Apple to create a product management group for development tools, and spent a couple of years doing product management. Then went back to engineering and managing engineers. I left for my first director of engineering role at Berkeley Systems. I was promoted to a VP of engineering at Charles Schwab. And then 10 years ago, as Rohit said, I began consulting, continuing to train teams in Agile, parachuting in as an interim VP of engineering sometimes, coaching engineering leaders, but fundamentally helping to make software development hum. I wrote one of the very few books on managing software people and teams. There's a ton of books on project management. All of you know there's a ton of books on Agile alone. There are very few books on managing the people who deliver the projects and the products. And I'm also a co-author of the study of product team performance, and we're going to share a little bit of some of the things we've learned. My co-authors and I asked people on product teams all over the world, characterize your team. Is it a high performance team or a low performance team or something in between? And then we ask about practices, and the data science member of our team then looks for, are there correlations between some practices and between high performance teams? And often enough there aren't, but there are some interesting correlations that we've discovered to Agile practices. So what we're here to talk about today are these topics. Are we doing Agile, or are we being Agile? And why do we want to be Agile? What's the difference? And why do we want to be Agile? Why do so many of us end up being Agile-ish instead of being Agile? And what gets in the way of being Agile? What are the symptoms of being Agile-ish, or of Frankensteining together an Agile process? And how do we become truly Agile? And so I'm going to lead off with a section, and then Tom and I are going to get interactive with all of you. But we're going to start with a poll. So where do you think your company lies in terms of being Agile? So Jill, can you bring up the poll?
You bet. There we go. So everybody from the audience, if you could just type in, where do you think your team lies in terms of being agile? You know, fully agile, 80%, 60%, 40%, or 20% to not agile. And the audience is voting. Hold on, we have just a few more to come in. And it looks like we have everybody. So let me share the results. There we go.
Okay, so they're right there in the middle. Tom, what do you think?
I think that's pretty typical for what we see in organizations, of where they have implemented some of the practices, but there's probably a lot of other aspects of the business that are not yet agile, which keep them from, achieving agile. And I think those are many of the things that we're achieving fully agile, which are many of the things we'll be talking about here.
Yep, I think that's probably true. Okay, so doing Agile or being Agile. So what's the difference? Why are we talking about this? So doing Agile is about practices and process. So Kanban has a process and a set of practices. Scrum has a process and a set of practices. Extreme programming has a process and a set of practices. Each of the approaches to doing Agile has a process and a set of practices. Being Agile, on the other hand, is about the values and principles that underlie all of those practices and process. Being Agile is foundational to doing Agile. But the question comes up every once in a while. So I'm in, and Tom probably is too, in a bunch of Agile discussion groups online. And the question comes up every once in a while. The question will come up: do Agile practices outside of the values and principles, do Agile practices themselves deliver value? and there are some agile purists who will answer, no, there's no value to agile practices without values and principles. And it led me to just throw up not throw up, but to create a list of list of various different agile practices. And so this is a random list, but I quickly put together this list and to ask the question, well, is there value to these practices? And if you look down them, you see things like, doing work in short sprints and planning publicly and transparently. Product managers, developers, testers, designers are a team. Together, the whole team defines what done means. Writing tests before writing implementation, one of the extreme programming practices. Reflecting frequently on how to do better. Every single one of these that I look at has value, has intrinsic value all by itself. And so given that agile practices do deliver value, so what's the deal with being agile? So I want to shift to a metaphor for just a moment, because here in the United States, voting is a practice and voting machines are a tool. So, and I don't think anyone would question that they deliver value. Beats counting boxes on pieces of paper. But do voting and voting machines make us a democracy? No, because democracy emanates from values and principles. And similarly, and to prove that, there are countries in the world where that have voting machines and do voting, and there's only one candidate on the ballot, or there are multiple candidates, but all the other ones are in jail, or they've been poisoned, or something equally awful.
Or there's coercion to the public to vote a certain way.
There's coercion of the public to vote a certain way, or votes are counted in very interesting ways. So voting and voting machines by themselves don't create democracies. Democracies come from values and principles. And similarly, agile practices don't make us agile. Agile practices only deliver better outputs. They don't deliver great teams. And I think the core of agile values is great teams. And agile values inspire those great teams. And so here are a few of the words from the Agile Manifesto. The URL to which is in the lower right-hand corner. Building projects around motivated individuals, trusting to get the job done, face-to-face conversation. And Tom and I are face-to-face right now, so we know that we can do this remotely, but face-to-face conversation is significant. Self-organizing teams. The team reflects and tunes and adjusts. So Tom, this inspired you to create this set of things.
Right. Yeah. If we'll look at these agile practices here, and I think these really do reflect back again to what you were talking about, especially those first 5 or so. But I think the part that stands out to me is the part that you talked about is trust. And when I find that organizations are not really doing agile practices, I see a command and control type environment where there's a lack of trust. And I think that partly goes down maybe to that part of accountability also, of where someone may have a responsibility that they need to take on, but they haven't taken on accountability to make sure that they're delivering the outcomes that are associated to that. And so, there's kind of there's a two-way street there is, we want senior management to trust us to make the right decisions, but then we also have to be willing to take on that accountability to deliver to those expectations.
Mm-hmm. And accountability to the rest of our team. Mm-hmm. And that trust and respect for each other is just embodied in being able to do that.
Yeah. So, and along that line, along the line of communications, you talked about the conversations in your slide, and I'm working with a client right now, and they do conversations, but it's kind of like we create a document, we sit around the table and talk about it, and then we hand it over, and someone goes and starts working, and they hand a document back. And what I'm seeing missing is yes, there's a little bit of communication, but there's not that real depth of sharing communication that's going on. And I think that all connects into all the rest of this, but that communication, I'm seeing more and more how important that is, especially between product manager teams and development teams.
Yeah, so they're not separate. They're actually part of the same team, and they're
Mhm.
collaboratively communicating as opposed to just communicating across the transom.
Yep.
Great. So we want to talk about why we're Agile-ish, what gets in the way. So why do we do Agile? What makes it hard to be Agile? I think one of those things is misunderstandings. We don't actually understand the essence of Agile, and we have different understandings. So I go into training teams, and what I typically find is that a third of the team came from some other organization that said it was Agile. You saw many of the responses I get. About a third of the team has read a book on Agile, or maybe two or three, but they're all different books. And then the third of the team is trying to learn Agile from the first two thirds. And there's a little bit of often misunderstanding and what those words even mean. Tom, do you have any? Does this resonate for you?
Well, it resonates, but it probably goes back to that part of we see it within product management too, where product managers learn from somewhere else and then they come into an organization and other people learn product management, and everyone is delivering a different message, and it starts to become really difficult to know which of these messages is the true one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then we've got lack of role models, and this is beginning to change, but we are still so close to the beginning of really good software development that many of us don't have role models for what good software development looks like. I know when I became a manager, all of my management role models were either command and control, tell people what to do, or they were throw people in the deep end and let's see whether they sink or swim. There was none of that, none of the true delegation and support and enabling that I learned after becoming a manager is actually core to being a great manager. So lack of role models, I think, is a really significant one here. And then history. So the history of management, the history of companies, the history of organizations is that they were always top down. They were always um, uh, uh, top managers telling everyone else what to do. They were always command and control, and only so it was in the 50s that McGregor and Hertzberg came along to say, hey, there's another way of doing management here. And Hertzberg, I think it was Hertzberg who came up with the X theory, Y theory, and X theory was that command and control, telling people what to do, making them do it. And his Y theory said, no, managers are for supporting their teams. And the words he used turned out to be the same words that were used for servant leadership, that Agile uses to describe servant leadership, which is we managers are here to support our teams, to enable our teams, to create the environments in which they as teams, as self-organizing teams, can truly thrive. And our history works against us because most of history that we've learned about organizations is different from that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then,
that is so true. Yeah, both the history and culture are so true. And I'm working with, again, I talk about companies that I work with, and I'm working with one right now where culturally, they still feel very command and control oriented. And even though there's certain aspects of Agile they want to implement, there's just some overarching barriers that stand in the way for them to be able to do that because of that history and culture that they have.
Yeah. And then mindset and it what we're looking for, what that thing about agile, about being agile, is really about mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the symptoms of agile-ish? So we've listed a few that we spot when we go into organizations, and here's the first one: stand-ups are really just status meetings. Stand-ups are not intended to be status meetings. You hear there are three questions, right? What did I do yesterday? What am I going to do tomorrow? And what's standing in my way? And the what's standing in my way actually has the potential for a team to act like a team and not just a bunch of people who report to the same stand-up. But the what did I do yesterday? What am I doing tomorrow? Often gets in the way, and it's really about what did I achieve against our plan yesterday? What am I intending to achieve against our plan today? By the time we meet up again tomorrow, is anything standing in my way, and do I need help, or can I help someone else who is calling out that they've run into a ton of technical debt, or the algorithm that we all anticipated we were going to use in this thing isn't going to work, or whatever's come up. We as a team are there to solve that together. No team-generated definition of done. When we, in the study of product team performance, when we asked about definitions of done, we asked the question, who writes your definition of done? And anticipating that some people would say, well, no one does, and we don't have one. In fact, I think it was 10%, maybe. It was smaller than we expected. Group said, no, we don't have a definition of done. No one writes our definition of done. But when we tested that, we found that did correlate with the lowest performance teams. What correlated with the highest performance teams wasn't having a definition of done. It was a definition of done that was written by members of the team, that was written by the team itself. The team came together around what does it mean to be done with every single story as we go along, because that's ultimately, we can then set aside the story with confidence that we're not going to have to revisit it, so that we can move along to working on the next story. And that story is done to the same level of engineering, we'll call it perfection, which is not true, but the same level of quality that we're willing to ship the whole product at the end.
Mm-hmm. Ron, do you find that, especially in your survey, I don't know whether this came out, but what I see is often an organization will create a corporate definition of done. And I'm thinking, based upon what you said, that, is better than no definition, but it's definitely not going to give you that level of empowerment if the team themselves defined it.
Yeah, what I want to see is the team taking that corporate definition. Think of it like object-oriented programming. Our team is inheriting the corporate definition of done. How do we need to subclass it to make it specific to our work? How do we need to subclass it with perhaps additional bullets, perhaps some of the corporate bullets that don't even apply to the work we're doing? And do we need to reword that in our own words so that it's meaningful for our team? And those teams that do that tend to fall into the high performance teams. So stories that are assigned to sprints and developers, as opposed to developers coming together, developers who are doing Scrum coming together in Scrum planning, and individually pulling stories into and creating the developers and testers and individual contributors, the realizers of those stories, pulling together the best plan that they can pull together and proposing that with their product managers, and the product managers then looking at what do we have to deliver in order to show progress to our stakeholders, our executives, and our end user customers, and getting that balance of the right stuff and the most efficient stuff, the most effective stuff. And that balance is a conversation on the team, not an assignment by managers, not an assignment by product managers, not an assignment by scrum masters. It's the team coming together to develop that plan.
And I expect a corollary to that is managers who are assigning the story points, or they're assigning the estimates of the stories to the team members versus them developing them, that themselves.
Yeah, yeah, and team leads doing that too. Rohit, do you have, are you seeing a question here?
So there's a question here, like definition of done. So what we understand it is that it is customizable, right, based on the organization. Now, can that customization includes like updating back into like Jira or the Rally, whatever you are using, meaning the description field? Because sometimes what happens, the management says, okay, definition of done, this is done, but there are some action items on us. So if it is not listed out in the Jira ticket, we really don't know where we are. So that can that be customized at this particular level as well, the definition of done?
Yeah, so I want to first differentiate the definition of done from acceptance criteria. So every story is going to have acceptance criteria, and we count on our product management colleagues to either write or ensure that the acceptance criteria are written. But the definition of done and the acceptance criteria are about what the customer expects. The definition of done is about engineering quality, the level of engineering quality that we're going to ship our product at. Maybe, you know, maybe there's a bullet there that says if code has been reviewed by someone other than the person who wrote it, or we're going to do this kind of, there's going to be unit tests, and those unit tests are going to be checked into our source code management system. And what I want to see with an Agile team is before it writes a single line of code, the Agile team comes together, and that's developers and testers and product manager and whoever's on the team, come together to say this is what it means to be done with every single story. These are the qualities of every story that we're going to finish here, and we're going to create a bunch of bullets. And when we were co-located, you know, I was and as an Agile workshop leader, I facilitated lots of definition of done conversations. They take about 45 minutes for the team to think about what it means to be done with every single story. And you know, I'm scribing those on a sheet of poster paper, and we'll put that up in the team room so that everybody can look at it. When we're remote from each other, we have to find a way to give visibility to that, whether it's taking it into Jira or putting it on Confluence or putting it somewhere that the team sees it while it's having its stand-up, its planning meeting, its demos, its retrospectives, those kinds of things, because it's core to the work we're doing.
Right, right. That makes sense. Right. So basically, like if the teams are remote, I mean, we have to be more disciplined towards like what we are doing and updating. So yeah,
Yep,
makes sense. Thanks, Ron.
great. So then stories that are too big. So I see this all the time where teams will pull a story in and say, well, this is what we're going to work on this sprint and next sprint and the sprint after that. Tom, you never see this, do you?
Never.
Yeah, and so we want to take those stories, and it takes a lot of discipline and some practice to split stories out, not splitting them into tasks. We're going to do that once we've got them as small enough stories, but we want slices of the functionality that we can finish in a sprint, and we can show to customers, where I define 3 sets of customers, external ones, but also executives and also stakeholders, and one or more of those sets of customers, we can show this work. We can show visible progress and get feedback on whether we're on the right track. And getting that feedback is just important. So occasionally I run into a team that has barely a sprint's worth of backlog. I was working with a team a year ago that typically they would come into their sprint planning meeting and there wasn't even a sprint's worth of backlog there. When we tested this in the study of product team performance, what we found were that teams that have about a quarter's worth or more of backlog and have sized in some way, estimated or sized that backlog for those stories relative to each other, those teams correlate with the highest performance teams. And certainly walking into a planning meeting with less than enough stuff to do for the sprint is certainly going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm. And Ron, I know that you didn't talk about this with the definition of done, but that kind of reflects back also on that definition of ready and really having a good understanding of what it means to have a set of backlog items ready to go into the sprint, and then effectively managing that backlog refinement process continuously to make sure that you maintain that backlog of items ready to go.
Yeah, I encourage teams to have 2.5 sprints worth of stories ready so that the team can walk into its planning meeting and say, well, the top story there is, it depends on Bob and Sue, and they're both on PTO this sprint. Let's skip that one and skip down, and we've got enough that we can create a really effective sprint plan out of that, and have a conversation with our product owner about it. So I'm a fan of looking at making sure our stories are ready and getting grooming by the whole team to make sure that they are. So I ran into a team last year that they couldn't get their projects funded unless every story was detailed and signed off by executive management. In fact, there had to be consensus among executive management. And they're wondering how they can make their development team, how they can make their engineering team work faster. And I'm coming in and looking at, well, you just spent 8 months getting consensus on a set of requirements, and then came to the team and said, can you get these all done in the next 3 months? And where's the delay here? How about the 8 months up front?
Well, and what I see this causes is if you think about part of Agile is being able to respond to change. But yet when a management team takes an approach that says, I'm going to fund a fully defined scope, you are not giving them the opportunity to be able to respond to change. And that is, as I speak to product management teams, mostly is one of those common concerns is we're doing agile practices, as you've talked about in the development side, but our organization is not really agile. And this is definitely one symptom that relates back to that.
Yep, it totally does, as does changes, those changes requiring recycling through executive sign-offs.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of concomitant with the previous bullet.
Right.
Teams that aren't trying new experiments every sprint. So Mike Cohn, who I think was the very first Scrum trainer, has said that if your team's not better a year from now, they're not agile. We need to every single sprint at least ask the question, what might make us a happier team? What might make us more effective? What might make us more productive? What might increase the quality of what we're delivering? What one experiment could we try in the coming sprint to try to achieve one of those things?
Mm-hmm.
And every retrospective should have an experiment coming out of it to try something that would make us more effective, happier, more productive, or raise the quality of our code. Here's that respect and trust lack thereof is certainly a symptom of Agile-ish, because Agile is about trust and respect and psychological safety and high performance teams. teams we all want to be on, than the command and control executive style, which foils Agile.
Mm-hmm. And that relates back to that funding issue that we talked about up above is that, funding is a mechanism that senior leaders have to control. And so at that point, they're starting to fund projects or they're starting to fund output, as we talk about, versus saying, let's fund an outcome and give you as, product teams to the flexibility to figure out how to deliver on that the best way possible.
Yep. So these are just some of the symptoms of Agilish, but they're pretty telling ones for both of us when we walk into teams and start investigating what they're looking at. So let's look at how to become truly agile. So doing products, not projects. Tom, do you want to say anything about? You want to start with this one?
Yeah, that is becoming one of my favorite discussions to get into. And what's interesting is as I've looked at, definitely software companies or the IT organizations within larger companies have and especially the IT organizations have traditionally taken a very project-oriented approach where they say, here's a project for software we want to do. We're going to fund it. We're going to form a team to work on it. And then once that's done, the team breaks up and they go on to do something else. But yet in reality, even within internal IT groups, those need to look at that software implementation as a product and continue to manage it, enhance it, build on that, with the product mindset. But so often the organizations fund projects, and that means teams move around, for each project, where the companies that I think are really having the best performance are funding products. They're saying you have a certain set of outcomes to achieve. Here's your funding for that. And by the way, you have a stable team to work with. And that having that stable team makes a significant difference in terms of, the effectiveness of those teams, their ability to deliver value, faster. And so that's a big trend that we're starting to see in organizations is moving away from a project funding into more of a product funding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was having dinner with an Agilist last night who was in the midst of one of those transformations in a very large company. And so looking for, why do we want to do this? He said, well, this company, not only are there 2 implementations of almost everything, not only are there 3, not only are there 4, but there are 5 typically implementations of everything, and there's no motivation to, we don't own this thing after we're done with the project, so let's just do it as quickly as possible. It ends up as ugly as possible because we don't have any long-term ownership. We don't have any long-term motivation to truly make it maintainable.
Mm-hmm.
So being outcomes driven, not output driven. So there are, and this one may not be in your control, or if you're a manager who's on this webinar, it may be, because it's not about measuring butts and seats. It's not about measuring lines of code. It's not about measuring numbers of pull requests. It's not about it's about changing. It's about delivering value to our customers. It's about delighting our customers, and we need to be focused on delighting our customers, not on how many lines of code we get out the door.
And I think along that line is, and this kind of gets into definitely being agile. But I think there are many times when we've done the traditional, here's the detailed requirements document, let's go ahead and build it. We're assuming that from a requirements perspective and from a user experience perspective, we always know exactly what the right answer is going to be. And so we build a plan, we try to follow it. But yet in reality, if we take more of an outcome base, we do recognize that we may not always know exactly what's the right way to implement something within a software product, and that we need to do some experimentation and learning to come up with the best approaches necessary. And so that's going to help you better drive outcomes. But again, if we go back to we funded a project with a certain scope, I'm not allowed to do that experimentation. But if I'm funding a product and stable teams, and I have an outcome that I'm targeted to achieve, then I have that ability to make the best decisions that are going to help me achieve those outcomes.
Yeah, a friend of mine in San Francisco who was a CTO, he's now a CEO of a startup, shared with me a rule of thumb that I thought was really a nugget of wisdom that I thought was really deep. He said, in the beginning, everyone will talk about scope and budget and schedule, but that's not truly what we care about. What we care about is people will love our software or they won't. And that's what we should manage to. And if you think about it, that's what keeps us in business. People loving our software is what keeps us in business. It's what keeps them coming back to us. Those are outcomes. It's not scope and budget and schedule. It's people loving our software, and we have to drive toward people loving our software.
And that applies for your internal customers also. If you're part of an IT team, that I think we have traditionally stayed, let's deliver on scope, budget, whatever someone said they wanted. But in the end, it's about making our internal stakeholders, thrilled about what they're able to use on a daily basis.
Yeah. I just posted, so I don't blog very often, but I just posted a blog post noting, when I got to manage the team developing the UX of the Macintosh when I was at Apple decades ago, 25 years ago, actually. And I hired not only for stellar C++ guru good on my team, but I also hired for customer empathy. And I made up those two words because I hadn't heard, I knew that's what I was looking for. I wanted developers who cared about our customers. Made up the words customer empathy, and I thought, I'm ahead of my time 25 years ago, but everyone else will catch up in 5 years. And it's 25 years later.
And many companies are now, but not as many as that should be.
Not as many as should be. So outcomes driven, not process driven. So I see sometimes that teams are like, no, we have to follow the process. It's not about the process. It's about the outcomes. Al Shalloway had just a wonderful rule of thumb when he said, and the point is not to do Agile, the point is to be effective. Agile provides us insights.
Excellent point.
Respect and trust and psychological safety. So some of you, maybe many of you know about Google's Aristotle study now 6 years ago. Google, like all of the rest of us, have high performance teams and low performance teams and teams in between. Google, unlike the rest of us, has a ton of money. And they decided to spend some of it figuring out what constituted their high performance teams, and they created yet another team, the Aristotle team, to study all of their other teams, thinking that it was going to be the makeup of the teams, that it was going to be, we've got a truly a guru level developer on the team, or they're all guru level developers, or there's some kind of diversity on the team, or what they found was it had nothing to do with who was on the team. It had everything to do with psychological safety. And those two words were words that I had never heard in software development before then, and now I hear them very frequently. And it's a result of Google's Aristotle study that we hear that, because what they said is every one of our high performance teams has psychological safety. And you can see it. On our high performance teams, there is equality and conversational turn taking. On the team, there's no one who dominates the conversation. There's no one who's silent. There's equality and conversational turn taking. I thought that was just a marvelous. And before Google came out with that study, I'd been asking members of teams for a number of years. Think about the best team you've ever been on. What were the characteristics of the best team you've ever been on? And two words always came up: trust and respect. Those two words that we were talking about earlier, Tom.
Yeah, and this just kind of causes me to think of another thing that I'm hearing is, and this relates probably a lot to the product manager world, is where failure within an organization is highly unacceptable. I will talk to companies, and we'll use it to talk, the principles of failing fast, etc. And they're just like, no, we can't use the word failure within the organization. And I think that kind of goes back to there's not a psychological safe space there is to try something and experiment and end up, even if it's a low cost investment, is there's still not that space and safety to try those things that could make you better, but also on occasion are going to fail.
So I'm generally in agreement that we shouldn't make the same mistake twice. But making this mistake the first time is something we're going to hopefully learn from so that we don't make it the second time. And it's going to be really valuable to us potentially. And I'm a real fan of blameless, going for root cause in a blameless way. So I hear people say, no, we can't go for root cause. We end up blaming somebody. It's like, okay, so when we get to that person, now let's ask one more why. What in our process enabled that person, let that person make that mistake? Because it's almost never, because I have yet to meet a developer who came to our company to say, oh, I came here to make things fail. I came here to write bugs. Nobody does that. Nobody wants to do that. So collaborating with customers and getting feedback cycles, actually hearing our customers' feedback and incorporating that into our project.
If you look at, and I still see companies doing this, but if you look at traditional product development, we get our requirements, we agree upon them, and then we go into our cone of silence for 6-12 months hiding ourselves, and then at the end we spit out a product and we go, customers, you're going to love it. And they're going like, maybe not. And the companies that I see do this best are picking multiple opportunities, both even in pre-development as you're getting validation around problems and concepts, through the development cycle, getting that customer feedback. And that, like you talked about, part of what the Agile practice enables us to be able to do that.
So I was talking to someone the other day, a product manager, who said, I was earlier in my career, I was working with one developer, and that developer we'd have 3 months to work on the project, and we'd get down to 2 weeks left, and that developer didn't have anything to show, didn't want to show anything until that last 2 weeks. And I said, no, we're going to switch this up. We're going to start showing work to customers in the first week. He was like, no, we don't want to do that. I said, well, let's try this. And she said, we showed it to customers the first week, and they came back and said, well, that's not exactly what we wanted. And then they showed it to them the second week, and they said, well, that's not exactly what we wanted. And she said, we got down to 2 weeks left, and we were working on an entirely different product. My developer said to me, now I understand why you wanted to show the work to the customers earlier. It's entirely different than what we would have been showing them right now.
Yeah.
And using the Agile Manifesto as a window to ask the question, are your practices actually Agile? Are you actually being Agile with your practices? So any additional comments to this slide that we showed you earlier?
No, I don't have anything additional. I think we covered those all really well.
Okay. So then that brings us to Q&A. So Rohit, do we have any questions coming in?
Right. So I don't see. So one question that came to us, it was earlier from a person who registered for the webinar. So that question was like, how do you sell the idea of cross-functional teams in an organization with entrenched functional silos?
Yeah, and so that whoever you were, thank you for asking that question yesterday, because it led me to think about that and to first a little bit of context. So this is the way that that organizations are we're typically designed pre-agile. So we got a web manager managing a bunch of web people, a database manager managing a bunch of database people, a server manager. We're divided into component teams. Now the problem with component teams is there are a huge number of dependencies among them, and it led to something that looks like this, which we've got the web manager. So this would be a long time ago, long before Agile. Cross-functional teams were deemed valuable, but they were not called cross-functional teams in those days. They were called matrix teams. And so what we can see here is those verticals are our teams. So you're looking at 5 teams here. The web managers still managing all the web people. They're still looking to their manager to grow their careers and to understand their problems and to help pull them together to solve those kinds of problems. But they're scattered across those, however many each one of those teams needs. They're scattered across there. The real cost of scaling is cross-team dependencies. And in order for our team to get stuff done, we're dependent on another team to do stuff for us. And so wait times, cross-team dependencies, and errors tend to be really common when we do this kind of a structure. And so if management's happy with the rate at which things are getting done, and management's happy with the number of errors that are coming up as a result of that, you're not likely to sell the idea of moving to cross-functional teams. But one of the ways to sell, if management's not happy or might be not happy, one of the ways to sell it is, and James Shore recently did a talk to Agile New England, citing a former client that had 40 teams working on the same stuff. And so this is a drawing of the dependencies. And so each of those rectangles is a team, and they began to draw all of the dependencies among all of their teams. They had literally there are 40 rectangles somewhere on that thing, and and he said, okay, so let's see if we can create logical cross-functional teams instead. And they reduced the dependencies to this. This is why we want to change from cross-functional teams to cross-functional teams from component teams, is the dependencies among teams are so high, and that cost is just phenomenal. So we want to avoid that. And actually drawing out the value stream analysis, I think is what James referred to it as, but I'd refer to it as just drawing out the cross team dependencies. Tom, any additional comments?
I'm laughing because I was training an organization that was in healthcare. Oh, it's been 5-6 years ago. And one of the participants was saying, yeah, we do these product review or these requirements reviews, and there are 100 people on these calls during the requirements review. And it's because every single person has a little domain that they're responsible for. And, and there's all these dependencies. And in the end, you need each person on there to be able to talk about their little area. And I think this is a great example. Again, I think if they had taken a little more cross-functional team, empowered people with a broader set of skills versus just one small little scope of as different sets of systems, they probably could have been much more efficient and effective, but they were organized in a way, along this line that, was very costly if you really look at it. And I think the dependencies to go and get something implemented was also very high and took a long time for them to be able to get those implemented.
Yeah, James said that, and it was more than this, but he said something like 80% of every team's time was wait time. They were waiting on another team that they were dependent on to finish their work, and only 20%. I think it was way less than that he said, but I don't remember now. But 20% or less of their time was actually productive time on the product.
I can believe it.
You've seen it and I've seen it, that's not atypical with this structure.
Right. And there are a couple of more questions. In the interest of time, we have only 6 minutes, so let me just talk about this question. It is like,
Great.
what is your opinion on the best way to measure velocity, showing the team how together we might be able to go even faster?
So I look at velocity. So the way you get teams to go faster is building trust and respect and psychological safety, is building teamness. There are way too many teams that are a whole bunch of individuals who report to the same stand-up. That's not a team. The way teams get faster is synergy, is teamwork. And velocity is not useful for measuring productivity or performance. So my second to the last blog post began with the words, don't ever use story points or velocity to measure performance or productivity, ever. I quoted, and I had this, and I led a conversation in one of those Agile discussion groups, and one of the contributors to that said, we don't ever let velocity leak outside of our team. And I thought that was a really valuable thing, because what velocity is useful for is if we do relative sizing of our whole backlog and we look at what our velocity is, velocity gives us, it's a measure of pace. And with that measure of pace, now we can be predictable against the remainder of our backlog. So we only get the pace after we're 2 or 3 sprints in, so we can average the velocity we've seen coming through our system. This is the pace of our team. That pace is what we then can apply against the backlog and say, so on November 17th, this is where we're going to be in our backlog. Is that the right stuff? If not, maybe we need another team working on this. If not, maybe we need to take things that are below that line and move them above the line and substitute them for things that are above the line that aren't as important as those things below the line. We've got opportunities to do trade-offs and to have conversations early as a result of that pace. But if we allow anyone outside the team to start measuring, the team will start gaming. Start gaming story points. I was talking with a team in Arizona once and explained this to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, we have a rule of thumb around that. What gets measured gets manipulated." The result of manipulating story points, all smart teams will do this. It's like if you're story points, we can increase our velocity just by increasing the story points per story. That's easy. In fact, I met a Scrum Master once who said I just multiplied all of the story points by 100, and when we were told that we were the slow team, and started delivering 100 times the velocity, and suddenly management was happy. It's like we weren't delivering anything different. They were just counting story points. So this is not useful. Story points and velocity are not useful.
Right.
Yeah, that's every team is going to have their own velocity, and you just cannot try to compare teams with each other. And then even if you change the makeup of the team, that's going to change the velocity.
Yes. And so velocity is really useful to the team, but it's very, very deadly to let it leak outside the team.
Right. And I think I can take one question real quick. It's like, how do you manage meetings versus coding time for teams? Do teams have dedicated person to attend meetings?
Well, so if software development, so my core rule of thumb is software development is a team sport. And team sports are gated by collaboration and communication. As Tom and I were discussing at the beginning of this webinar, it's not just one-way communication that goes one way and then comes back. It's collaborative communication. And if that's what gates a team, and software development's a team sport, then maybe that means we ought to talk to each other at least once a day. In fact, we found that in the study of product team performance, those teams that had an effective daily stand-up were correlated with the highest performance teams. So we need that. If we're going to have any additional meetings, we want to gang them. We want to make them. We want to put all of our interrupts to our developers and testers and designers' time all at the same place. James Shore in that talk that I was referencing to Agile New England was talking about a team that Monday and Tuesday and Thursday and Friday were entirely dedicated to the teams, other than their stand-up, and all other meetings were on Wednesdays. That's a great way to gang all the meetings together. If we have new requirements coming in, which never happens to anyone, if we got new requirements coming in, they haven't been sized. We need to we need to have a sizing meeting to fit them into our relative sizing. And we're going to gang that right after the stand-up because we want the whole team involved in sizing. And we'll add another 15 minutes onto our stand-up because we've got the whole team together. We're not going to put another interrupt in the afternoon and interrupt them again. Then we're really going to gang all of our meetings together so that they're not there's not this whole staccato interruption thing.
Yep. And that applies not only to software development teams, but people in many other roles. Because I think even other roles in an organization find themselves in that interrupt-driven type world, to where meetings are spread out, and then each time they come back to work, there's that moment that takes them to get back up to productivity again. And I know for myself, where I have control over it, I do try to, put my meetings together.
Yep. I think that's all. Now we are almost at the end. It's like 1 minute over, but thanks Tom and Ron for the great presentation. It was an excellent learning for me personally. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can reach out to us. Jill will be sending the contact information with the recording. I look forward to see you all in our future webinars. And I think this is all for today. Thanks and have a great day, everyone.
All right, thanks, Rohit.
All right, thank you so much.
And thank you, Jill.
All right.
Thanks, Jill.